Tiffany, welcome to the Dope Living Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
You know, there's just so much more that can be thought of and done.
Sure. And this is something that's known as the curb cut effect. Essentially, the curb cut effect, as an act of defiance in the 70s, a group of students who were wheelchair users in the Bay Area, they went and cut into the curb so that they could get from the street onto the sidewalk step-free. And it just so happened that that act of defiance ended up benefiting a lot of other people, such as package delivery people with carts, or Tiffany with her carry-on luggage with wheels, or a parent with a stroller, to be able to get something that they had with wheels from the street onto the sidewalk without any friction, right?
It's not even a question that I think a lot of people think about, but we should. Everyone should, right? Everyone should be, that should be like second nature at this point. And it doesn't seem that we're there yet.
And I think about something I call the assumption funnel, where we make an assumption just based on someone's disability, like not knowing anything else about them. And we take some action that as a result ends up becoming self-fulfilling. So it reinforces the assumption. So an example could be, we assume that blind people don't enjoy watching soccer. So we don't make the ticketing platform accessible for them to buy a ticket, so they don't end up watching the soccer game. So the more that people can prioritize access so that we don't have to experience that friction, not only from entering and participating in that space, but cost access as well, will help, I think, alleviate some of that disability tax.
Welcome to the Dope Living Podcast, a conversation about intentional living in the age of AI and technology. We talk about Gen Z, we talk about emerging markets, we talk about the next billion users, but 1.3 billion people are already here, and most companies are designing as if they don't exist. 16% of the global population live with disability, 1 in 6 people on Earth, across every country, every culture, and every industry. The World Bank estimates that 1 billion of them are of working age. And yet globally, disabled people face significantly lower employment rates. In the UK, for example, only 54% of disabled people are employed compared to 82% of non-disabled people, a gap of nearly 30 percentage points. In many countries, this gap is even wider. At the same time, and this is going to, I think, change all of our perspectives. The companies that lead in disability inclusion see 2.6 times the net income and 1.6 times the revenue of their peers, and are 25% more likely to outperform in productivity. The global disability market includes 1.85 billion people controlling $13 trillion in annual disposable income. When you include family and friends whose decisions are influenced by disability, that's 3.4 billion people, nearly half of the world. And within that, entrepreneurs with disabilities, and I give a shout out to the SBDC that has an amazing program here for entrepreneurs with disabilities. They're building products, companies, and communities, and that the rest of the world don't even get to see because they've spent their lives navigating the world that wasn't designed for them. So that brings me to my guest today, Tiffany Yu. Make sure I say your name right, Tiffany Yu.
Yep, that's correct.
She's the CEO and founder of Diversability, an award-winning social enterprise elevating disability pride. The founder of the Awesome Foundation Disability Chapter, which has awarded over $100,000 to more than 100 disability projects in 17 countries, and the author of a book called The Anti-Ableist. Did I say that right?
Anti-ableist.
Yes. The Anti-Ableist Manifesto, Smashing Stereotypes, Forging Change, and Building a Disability Inclusive World. So I know that was a lot, but I definitely wanted to ensure that I serve, that I give justice to this conversation because it's so important. Now, Tiffany, in addition to all of that, you serve on the FIFA World Cup 2026 Accessibility Advisory Board and the NIH National Advisory Board on Medical Rehabilitation Research, and was named the 2025 Forbes Accessibility 100 list. Your TED Talk, How to Help Employees with Disabilities Thrive, has over 1 million views. And at 9 years old, Tiffany became disabled in a car accident that also took the life of her father. She went on to work at Goldman Sachs, Bloomberg, and startups before realizing that the world needed to hear her voice more than it needed another banker, which I love. And today we're exploring what she's learned. Take us through your book, of course, and what most people don't know they are perpetuating about global business cases for inclusion that leaders keep ignoring, and about what it really means to build a life that you're proud of, even when the world wasn't designed with you in mind. Tiffany, welcome to the Dope Living Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. So I want to start with your story, really. So you wrote a book, and for someone listening who's thinking, well, this might not be, this isn't about me. I care about people. What do they need to understand about how, and I don't want to mess up the word, and I keep messing it up, but I want to say it right, but how it plays in everybody's life and how it shows up even for well-intentioned people?
So I wrote this book because, as you mentioned in the intro, we now have a business case for disability inclusion. And so while I think we spent a long time leaning into the moral imperative for disability inclusion, which is our shared humanity, we should care about other people, we should be empathetic and compassionate, we now have an economic imperative as well. So depending on what resonates with you, is it the business and data around learning that we control $18 trillion? That's the size of the disability market. And that's the updated number since I've written the book. And so I think what people are missing is not only like access to talent, but if you are a business owner, it's access to customers. I even think about a company that just launched recently called Tilt Beauty. And the founder has a disability that impacts her ability to grip. And so she has designed kind of these ergonomic friendly mascaras and lipsticks and lip liners and other products. And that, as someone, so for me, one of my arms is paralyzed. For someone like me, this is the first time that I've been able to open a mascara tube without having to, do some acrobatic yoga moves, to hold the tube, like stabilize with my feet or other things like that. And I think about the ways that we haven't really thought about that, right? So not only is the product really great, I'm wearing it right now, if you can see the lift. And it's also been featured, I think, on like Good Morning America or Today. So it's a great product, but it also serves probably the over 20 million people who live with some kind of upper extremity disability and maybe might have some dexterity issues when wanting to wear beauty products. And yeah.
I love that. I mean, the context around, innovation, right? Because I think innovation, that's where my mind is. But at the same time, it's innovation, it's inclusion, and it's remembering that the economics behind it all, right? That we are talking about a very large chunk of the world. And, there's just so much more that can be thought of and done, that benefit the whole, right? And not taking that away at all.
For sure. And this is something that's known as the curb cut effect, which essentially the curb cut effect, as an act of defiance in the 70s, a group of students who were wheelchair users in the Bay Area, they went and cut into the curb so that they could get from the street onto the sidewalk step free. And it just so happened that act of defiance ended up benefiting a lot of other people, such as package delivery people with carts, or Tiffany with her carry-on luggage with wheels, or a parent with a stroller, to be able to get something that they had with wheels from the street onto the sidewalk without any friction, right? And so in the case of the mascara, and in addition to that, I love the idea. We often say that disability drives innovation because, as again, you mentioned in the intro, so much of the world isn't really built with our needs in mind. And so we are always essentially what Liz Jackson calls life hacking. We are trying to figure out ways how to navigate the world that wasn't built for us. And I just want to share one other story, which is a couple of years ago, Victoria's Secret launched their Adaptive Intimates line. And one of their products is a bra that clasps in the front with magnets. And one of the things that was interesting was I got to attend like a panel discussion with Victoria's Secret and some of their C-level leadership around why they were launching the lines. And someone from Victoria's Secret leadership said, we realize there's a business case. We realize there's a consumer market of people who, and especially for someone like me, if you think about clasping a bra in the back, if you can only use one arm or maybe you have some dexterity related disability, that becomes difficult, right? So a lot of my friends who have disabilities similar to mine are just wearing sports bras all the time. And now we have access to even something as simple as underwear. People haven't thought about us. And I do think that that's changing. And I think a big part of it is the elevation of disability culture. It's seeing more storylines. Even the fact that I get to speak to you about a book that I have out now with Hachette. About 5-10 years ago, I could probably only count on my one hand how many disabled authors I knew who were publishing books with big 5 publishers. And now I think they're seeing how much the disability community is mobilizing. Not only, my book right now is on its 5th printing. And a lot of that was driven by the disability community, who essentially wasn't the intended reader of the book, but saying, okay, I'm a disabled person. I'm going to get this book and I'm going to give it to all my family and friends so that they know how to better show up for me. Or I'm going to give this to my therapist so that they know, or my medical team so that they know how to better show up for me, rather than through a being pathologized and more as a multifaceted human who has a body and her mind that works a little bit differently.
It's so powerful, right? Because not only it's for anyone, right? That's building a company, building a product, and it is one of the questions that you're going to ask yourself, right? And this is bringing awareness to it: is how accessible is it? The thing that I'm trying to build, the product that I'm thinking about, how accessible is it? And it's not even a question that I think a lot of people think about, but we should. Everyone should, right? Everyone should be, that should be like second nature at this point. And it doesn't seem that we're there yet. It's innovation, right? Anything that's built with inclusion is naturally innovation. Because things haven't been designed. The world just hasn't been designed for them. What does the disability experience actually build in terms of skills and perspectives that companies and investors might be sleeping on?
Ooh, good question. I think about probably the ones that come to mind the quickest are problem solving, adaptation, and creativity. And again, this ties back to our conversation around innovation. But I think about how swiftly at the start of the pandemic, many of us had to shift into working remotely. And I know that there was probably a lot of friction or maybe resistance to doing it that way, but we figured it out, right? And so I also think back to that ability to figure things out. And I think just to comment on something that you said, how we haven't really caught up yet. I do think that we're moving there, right? So in my intro, you mentioned I'm part of the FIFA Accessibility Advisory Board. This is the first time ever that they're doing this. And the World Cup has been around for a long time. And I think about something I call the assumption funnel, where we make an assumption just based on someone's disability, like not knowing anything else about them. And we take some action that as a result ends up becoming self-fulfilling. So it reinforces the assumption. So an example could be, we assume that blind people don't enjoy watching soccer. So we don't make the ticketing platform accessible for them to buy a ticket, so they don't end up watching the soccer game. So again, the assumption kind of starts and gets reinforced at the end based on the action that people are taking that limits us. So yeah, but I think just to come back around what companies and investors and organizations are missing out on, it is just a talent pool that is always constantly trying to figure out how to make things work, and having a level of, empathy and compassion. I think about a friend, her name is Andrea Dalzell, and she is the first nurse in the state of New York who was a wheelchair user. And again, at the start of the pandemic or prior to the pandemic, she was applying to all different types of jobs, and people were telling her that she couldn't be a nurse because she was in a wheelchair, right? Even just thinking about kind of the assumption funnel at play. And then at the start of the pandemic, like, she had a lot more empathy and that compassionate bedside manner for a lot of the people who were coming in, who were experiencing levels of grief around new symptoms, or maybe they now have long COVID and have to figure out how to navigate with this new disability in this new body, right? And so we also bring kind of a level of empathy and understanding that can help support how we relate to our customers or our colleagues.
I want to move into now the global business case that no one's using, right? So let's talk about the business case, because I think this is where a lot of leaders could wake up now. So research shows that with disability, found that companies leading in disability inclusion see 1.6 times revenue, 2.6 times in net income, and 2 times higher net income margins compared to their peers. So from where you sit, isn't this front and center in most boardrooms?
I mean, we would like it to be. So the first iteration of this research came out with Accenture in 2018. And then the updated research came out in 2023. And even if you think about it, the fact that we have only started to have that research in 2018 means that it's newer, right? So how do we figure out broader ways to disseminate this research out as well? So I think we're starting to see some shifts, which is a couple of years ago, an initiative was launched called the Valuable 500. And the Valuable 500 was this initiative to say, can we get 500 CEOs of companies with more than 1,000 employees to commit to putting disability inclusion on their board agenda? And this, this could be a range of things. It could be, increasing training, creating some hiring targets around disability. But I just love the fact that we do have research. And if you are a company that has shareholders or investors who are invested in the commercial success of your company, championing disability inclusion will make your company more profitable overall. And this research is available for everyone, right? And so I think it is, how do we equip people with that so that they can bring it within their organizations? And I will say, so I've been disabled for 28 years. I've been active as a disability advocate for 17 years. In 2009, when I started finding my voice as an advocate, I would talk about disability pride, and I would still get a lot of pity around it, or people thinking that our lives were tragic simply by existing. And we still get a little or a lot of that, but we have just as many forces now who are going out and elevating the culture. I think about people like Marissa Bodie, who played Nessa Rose in the Wicked films that came out. And she was the first actress in a wheelchair who is actually a wheelchair user to play Nessa Rose in all of the time that Wicked has been on Broadway and the West End, if you're in the UK. And so now so many, and what's interesting, she lives in Los Angeles and I do too. And so I've seen her at a couple of events. I'll have people be like, oh my gosh, you know Nessa Rose, because they love Wicked, right? And they're invested, I think Hollywood does drive a lot of the narratives as well, which is part of why I wanted to move here is, yes, business case, but where do all of the harmful assumptions and stereotypes actually start? And they start in the media and the books that we're reading and the movies and TV shows that we're watching. And what are the storylines that they're reinforcing that then come in as we move through being a kid who's watching, kids' TV shows to now going out and applying for jobs? And what are the biases that we have carried from our childhood that are coming into adulthood that impact how we think about disabled talent? So I appreciate opportunities to get to engage with people like you because you may have access to audiences and now you're equipped with the data that you can bring into spaces to say, hey, I work with a lot of companies or a lot of small businesses. And if you want to be more profitable, check out this research. And if you're looking for more resources, check out Tiffany's book or check out, there's a platform called Making Space where employers can sign up to get access to disabled talent. And there are a couple of other places like that too, where how can we be more intentional about our hiring and see it pay off in terms of innovation?
Right. And that spillover, going back to innovation, that spillover is an innovation as well. How can we ensure that the use covers more of the population so that our products can also, what we're producing and innovating also has everyone in mind, and ensuring that and also talking about the economics of that. I think it is a language that is spoken, and that's why I'm mentioning it so much, because it's spoken, of course, in the boardroom. And we do need to have more of that representation in the boardroom and that research in there. Because and that's why I'm not starting from I'm not making the baseline kind of the biases that exist. And we know they exist and it's an uphill battle. But how can we, bring more business cases to the light so that we can also, show a different side to it other than like fighting a bias, for example, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then there are products like the electric toothbrush and audiobooks, which were actually designed for disabled people that have much broader commercial use, right? And so, I think it ties back to, I see a lot of initiatives out there that are trying to get more women onto boards or more people of color onto boards. I don't know if we are yet at a point, but maybe that initiative will start soon to really start tracking the data around disability representation in boards. But I don't think I've come across it yet. So if you're listening to this and you have come across it, definitely let me know. But I know that we are part of this broader movement around getting more historically underrepresented groups into these boardrooms, because that is where power is, and having our voices in there can really help shape the trajectory of these companies as well.
Exactly. So making another shift, you've spoken before about disability tax, the extra time, money, and mental bandwidth disabled people pay every day to navigate a world that isn't accessible. For non-disabled people listening who want to be better allies, for example, what do they need to understand about that tax and how it compounds over time?
Ooh, what's interesting is at the end of that chapter on the disability tax, I mention a quote from Becca Laurie Hector, who says that one way that people can better support us in lowering the disability tax is by prioritizing access. So essentially what I mean by that is, for someone like me who has a paralyzed arm, I usually have to check a bag because, I can't, or maybe I can now because I started rock climbing, but putting your luggage in the overhead compartment, I've actually never seen anyone do it with one hand. Maybe it has been done before if it's light enough. I've been able to see people pull it out with one hand, but putting it up sometimes requires a little bit of a balancing act, especially if you don't want to hit the people around you. And so every single time I check my bag, I have to pay an extra $25 to $40, right? Every single time. But if we are prioritizing access and saying, oh, there may be some people who may not be able to put their luggage in the overhead compartment. And so can we remove can we waive that fee for now? And of course, there are some instances where they have too many carry-on luggage and they'll ask you to gate check your bag. And that's actually when they remind you that it will be free if you decide to do it that way. But that's an example of ways that, for people who are unfamiliar with the disability tax, it's literally, or even for someone like me, so I live with PTSD as well. I can get easily distracted. And so having access to a quiet space means that I often live alone. And living alone versus living with roommates means that my rent may be a little bit more, right? So I'm paying a little bit more because that's what I need for my access. And the example that I use in the book is around a cutting board. And I shared the example of how I bought a cutting board that is meant for people who can only use one hand, and it came with a specific knife. And that when I bought it, it was around $65 to $75. And if you just think about buying a cutting board or a knife from a grocery store, on the nicer end, that would probably be $30 all in, unless you got like a really nice knife. But then I'm thinking, okay, for me to cut a cucumber, I'm paying $75 and you're paying $30 to do the same activity, right? And so then it's like, okay, in addition to that, research is also showing that we're making less because maybe for us, we need to work more flexible hours. So maybe we're not in a salaried role and we're taking lower wages so that we can have more flexibility around our time. So we're making less, but the things that we need to do daily life tasks are costing us more. So the more that people can prioritize access so that we don't have to experience that friction, not only from entering and participating in that space, but cost access as well, will help, I think, alleviate some of that disability tax. That's super powerful.
Again, it's one of those things we don't think about enough. And I'm happy that we're having the conversation because we're bringing it to light, and especially for this audience, because the conversations that we have is all about living more intentionally and being able to live a life that feels as good as it looks. And a part of being whole humans is understanding that how these different levels of access, how access can work across groups, but how can you enable or help to advocate for some of the things we just didn't, we get so consumed with our own lives, but ensuring that, we realize that we're a whole, like we're a whole group of people that need to be working together. And I think we get it more and more, but we always need to be reminded, but can you walk us through, and this is definitely for anyone that has had to make kind of this sudden transition, can you walk us through when disability shifted from something that happened to you to something that became a source of pride and community for you?
So this dates back to my college years. And I will share that it wasn't until I got to college that I started to identify as Taiwanese American. My dad is an immigrant from Taiwan. But we grew up in Maryland suburbia where we were one of a handful of Asian families. And so I didn't really have anyone to talk to about my race, nor did I have mirrors reflected back to me. And so because of that, I didn't really have a strong sense of my identity around being Asian until I got to college. And I met another student during freshman orientation who told me that her mom was from Taiwan. And, freshman orientation, you're trying to make friends, look for those points of connection. And so she told me her mom was from Taiwan. I told her my dad was from Taiwan. And then I said, we should start a club. But kind of like an offhand remark. But she actually took that and ran with it. And together, Jackie and I became the co-founders of Georgetown University's first ever Taiwanese American Student Club. And being a part of that club gave me a sense of pride and identity, culture, empowerment, history, community, in an aspect of my identity that I had internalized that I had to erase because my parents were immigrants. And when they came to the US, there was a lot of anti-Asian sentiment. And, even as we're recording this, we're seeing a continuation of that in some ways. And And so up until that point, I had seen my disability or internalized that I should feel shameful around it and to kind of anchor myself to a non-disabled body. I think similar to the ways some of us who are people of color have been told to anchor ourselves to whiteness. And so I wore long sleeves all the time. I tried to hide my paralyzed arm. I actually, at this particular point in time, hadn't even been diagnosed with PTSD. So I guess mental illness wasn't even recognized because you couldn't see it per se. But we know that 80% of disabilities are not apparent. And so now I'm grateful that we're kind of broadening the conversation around that. And I even have this memory of my high school graduation and going down the line, and you have to shake hands with all the administrators. And I am now a left-handed handshaker, but at my high school graduation, I attempted to shake everyone's hand with my paralyzed right arm, which, has no grip, my disability is probably the most impacted in my hand. And so even in telling that story, I'm trying to anchor to a non-disabled body, right? I'm trying to do everything the same way as everyone else, even though I know that my body doesn't work in the same way. And so I share that because now here I am, a senior at Georgetown, have had a great run with the Taiwanese American Club, which has still been around, is growing and flourishing. And I had just finished a summer internship in banking at Goldman Sachs in investment banking. And while I was at Goldman, I got introduced to a lot of the employee resource groups that they had. So they had one for women because women are underrepresented in financial services. There was one for Asian employees, one for LGBT employees, and then there was one for disability. And that actually became my first disability community. And I said, if a place like Goldman Sachs has a disability community, why doesn't this exist in other places? And what was fascinating was when I would show up at the events that at the time it was called the Disability Interest Forum, that this disability group was hosting at the bank, I felt like I could finally take the mask off. Like all of us had different disabilities. None of us were forced to disclose or anything, but we could just exist in this space as we were. This is a concept that it was coined by Mia Mingus. It's known as access intimacy. And my version of that is when you can show up in a space and exhale. And I'm sure for you as a woman of color, like maybe you have experienced that in your own spaces as well. And I know I've experienced that in the Taiwanese American community or different clubs I was in. And so I felt this access intimacy where I didn't have to try to anchor myself to a non-disabled body. And I started to reflect on the fact that we had co-founded this Taiwanese American club. And I said, I know how to start clubs. I don't know if I'm fully proud and own my disability identity yet, but I would love to not feel shame about something I have to think about every single day. And so that kind of became the beginning of the seeds that were planted to start Georgetown's first ever disability student club. And I was a senior then. And we outgrew the university environment and incorporated as a business in 2015 and have kind of been on the trajectory since. And my thesis essentially was, my book is called The Anti-Ableist Manifesto. And ableism, similar to sexism and racism, is a system of oppression that devalues people based on the way their body and or mind works. And part of how I believe ableism gets its power is by making us think we have none. And part of how we think we have no power is by keeping us isolated. So I even think about Tiffany growing up as one of only a couple Asian families, right? I'm isolated. So I have no one to talk about this shared identity with. I don't have a community. And so the thesis is if we can find each other, then we can find our voice and realize that we have power and influence together to be the fullest embodiment of who we are, or what I like to call disability pride or disabled joy, to essentially say society is telling us because of ableism that we should feel shame about who we are and hide ourselves away and isolate and be excluded from the world and participating. But disability pride says, hey, I'm showing up in who I am. And I think that was the beginning of my journey. And that was a little over a decade after I became disabled, was I started to share that journey. And I wanted to share that point around the Taiwanese American Club, because this is not only where intersectionality comes into play, but also solidarity, to say, none of us have a single identity. And how can we find those networks or those allies or those people who are going to show up alongside us when we feel so isolated in our experience, who are going to be mirrors to us to say, we're not alone, or to say, hey, I don't share that lived experience, but I care about you and I care about the things you care about. So I want to figure out how I can show up better for you. Thank you for letting me share that content.
I love it. And I go back to the beginning of this conversation because I hadn't. So in full disclosure, it's been a crazy couple of days, right? And what I love to do, the reason why I do this podcast is and it's like therapy for me. There's a lot of stuff that I need to learn. And instead of paying for a therapist, I said, let me do what I do well and do something like this. And it's been amazing because I get to encounter people like you that are teaching me things. And I'm not sure if it's teaching me, it's probably both, teaching and bringing awareness to things that I think this audience and the audience today was, as I imagine it, is people that are at kind of this inflection point in their life where they either have to make a decision that I'm going to be myself, like you almost been living a lie, like you've been living by everybody else's rules up to a certain point, and then you're about to reach the second half of your life, if you thought about lives in halves. And it's like, am I going to take the next part of my life and do the same thing? Or am I going to be true to myself? But to be true to yourself, I think you have to now think of yourself as more than just you. It's everybody else. So forgive me because I'm learning now about ableism, which I hadn't been able to do my own research on. And, bringing awareness to that is amazing because, of course, we know about sexism, we know about racism, and those are always to the forefront. But to actually think that ableism is a thing, and it's something that we all need to understand does exist and figure out where it exists in our lives and how do we become better allies to when we see that occurring. So I wanted to say that because this conversation is really bringing to light, a lot of the things that I think we've been just so in our own world and swamped up into this point. And now if we want to cross over and be able to live by our own rules, we've got to understand how that impacts the rest of the world and how we can be better human beings as a whole. So I thank you for this conversation for sure.
Yeah, I think the other thing I'll add too is that the first time ableism as a word was ever used was 1981. And I'm born in the 1980s and I don't think I'm that old. And so I even just want to highlight that if ableism is a new term to you, I'm not here learning to me should never be about shame. We haven't had language until the 1980s to describe this devaluing of disabled bodies and our minds, right? And sexism and racism, like the devaluing of non-white people or the devaluing of women, we've had that language for a long time, right? And so I also think about the ways, you talked about the free therapy, that if we as disabled people didn't have language around ableism and it's impacting our mental health, we don't know what to do about it, right? I think there's something I learned in therapy. I think it's like name it to tame it, I think it's name it to tame it. So it's like, we want to know like what are the emotions you're experiencing or what are you experiencing? And if you don't have the language around ableism, then you're like, I'm just feeling devalued in a certain way, but like, I don't know what it is. It just feels amorphous, right? So now we're seeing more elevated consciousness around ableism as many of us are learning more about the other systems of oppression as well.
And I love how you articulate that. And for anyone that's listening, this is something new that I'm learning as well, and I'm taking everyone on this journey. I think it's something that we definitely need to create more resources on and start to put it on the same playing field as everything else that, we've got to be aware of as whole humans. I'm switching over now from Goldman Sachs to Diversability. Your resume, of course, like any classic success story, Goldman Sachs, Bloomberg, startups in media and real estate. And then you pivoted to build Diversability and the global disability pride movement. What was the moment that you realized that, I can't keep optimizing spreadsheets. I need to build something that reflects my lived experiences?
Ooh, I will share two stories. So one is I actually started Diversability or relaunched Diversability outside of the collegiate environment. Essentially, we were kind of like a meetup for disabled people when we first relaunched. And at that particular point in time, I had spent a couple years at Goldman, was part of their disability employee resource group. At Bloomberg, I'm really proud to have co-founded their disability employee resource group and pitched its creation to the chief diversity officer at the time. That was a little over 10 years ago. Like, I can't even believe that network has been around for 10 years. And talk about legacy too. Like, then I left Bloomberg. And so once I moved to startups, right, the companies are too small to have access to these networks. And so I kept thinking about, where can I continue to go to find disability community? So I was still working full-time in finance and corporate development related roles. But I was hosting these disability meetups on the side. And I feel like there's a period of time around 2015 where like side hustles were really popular. I feel like we call it something different now. I feel like now it's called creative entrepreneurship because so many more of us are creators or more entrepreneurial or doing a lot of different things to make up whatever our portfolio career looks like. So say that one more time.
Multi-hyphenate too,
yeah.
I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I will say I go between multi-hyphenate and portfolio career, but I like portfolio because it's saying, here's all the things that I'm working on. Multi-hyphenate is essentially the same thing. But in 2017, I was working at a startup in real estate, again, still running Diversability on the side and doing these events in different cities. And I got fired. And, I love that you kind of opened the question being like, Tiffany's a success story, but I like sharing that part of my story because I'm not good at everything and no one is good at everything, right? And there are some jobs that I'm going to be good at. And in this particular case, they didn't think I was very good at that job. So I got let go. And that was 2017. And I went on to unemployment benefits at the time. And I told myself that I would just still continue to run Diversability. And I will say it probably wasn't until 2021 that I feel like we really hit our stride, or I hit my stride as a disability advocate. And I started to build out my hyphens or my portfolio to be like, okay, Tiffany is running these events or running this community at Diversability, but she's also a speaker and a content creator and an author, right? And together, all of those, the umbrella over all of it is disability advocacy and all of the different ways that I can make an impact. So with Diversability, it's through community, and with the speaking and the content creation and the book, it's really around education. It's having conversations like the one you and I are having right now. And then I have a third one that I call economic empowerment, where we, you mentioned it in the intro, we award monthly micro grants to disability projects, like reinvesting back in our community. And then I have a final one that I call like civic engagement. And that's, serving on these advisory boards. And then I added a last one that I call joy. And that's just, what am I doing for me? That is the embodiment of my disabled joy, which is to show that those of us who are advocates are also multifaceted, and not only, we don't have to do advocacy work all the time, right? We need to make space for this to be sustainable, to find things that we find joy in that maybe serve no other purpose than providing us joy. So I think those were the two turning points. One is, kind of that shift to say, and then one thing, I guess I'll add a third, which was interesting, was when we started hosting these events back in 2015, I'm working at these startups. I got a note from someone from the New York Public Library who said, "Hey, Tiffany," and the New York Public Library, I was living in New York at the time, had hosted a couple of our Diversability events. We love our library. It's always a great space and so many resources there. And so someone from their staff came to me and they said, "Oh, we're actually looking to do a librarian awareness training. And we're looking to curate the experiences of people who have different types of disabilities and their experiences at the library. Because you've built this disability-centered community, we actually thought you could help curate the speakers for us. And we also have a stipend, a speaker stipend that we can pay them." So that's when I started to realize that there is value in our lived experience and value in terms of monetary value as well, right? People are willing to compensate us for our expertise. And that was when I started to realize, oh, we might be onto something here. So again, not only are we helping disabled people find each other, but is there a subset of this community who know and want to take their advocacy or their leadership to the next level and be more visible and provide, consulting or focus groups for these companies? I was actually part of the wear test for the Victoria's Secret bra, right? And so how can we contribute and lean into that lived experience? I want to put an asterisk in that to say as well that every once in a while, I still do miss my finance days. I also want to highlight that just because we're disabled, being disabled is not the only thing that we're an expert in. At any one point in time, I could go back to doing the financial models and things like that. And I still find some joy in seeing, looking at our books and seeing all of them flow together. So part of that to just say we're valuable, period. Whether we are sharing or educating, if we choose to, about our disability experience and providing that level of feedback to the people who are designing or creating experiences and products with us in mind. And we could just be a software engineer or, a TV producer or a director or a sales representative somewhere. So,
exactly. Yeah. So let's talk about designing workplaces where everyone thrives. So your TED Talk has been watched by over 1 million people, and at the same time, globally disabled people remain underemployed. So if you had to name 3 shifts you'd want to see employers make in the next 5 years, what would they be?
I think the root of all of this comes back to the assumptions that people are making. And whether it's the assumption funnel to say, I assume that Tiffany can't type, so I assume that she can't work on financial models. So we don't give her a job or something. And this is just me kind of recounting if you do get a chance to watch that 5-minute TED Talk. So the first is around stopping to make assumptions. And there's research out there that has said that in an interview with hiring managers and HR leaders, they asked why aren't they prioritizing disability hiring or disability employment? And the top answers were that they weren't sure if the disabled person could or couldn't do the job. So even before they get our application, they're already making assumptions that we can't do it. But if we applied for that job in the first place, we think that we can do it, right? And this is why I'm kind of a big fan of apprenticeships or internships programs or contract roles that then have an opportunity to turn into permanent roles or full-time roles. We call that temp to perm in some ways. The second is really around rethinking accommodations. And behind that is, I had this aha moment where we started this conversation kind of talking about innovation and inclusion and design, the way we're designing products and experiences. And the definition of inclusive design is multiple design variations so long as we achieve the same desired outcome. So, in the example of a book, it could be the multiple design variations are it's available in hardback, audiobook, and Kindle. So you have the same desired outcome, which is the contents of the book. As we bring that into the conversation around accommodations are multiple design variations so long as you can do your work. And so I think part of the rethinking accommodations is that not only are the majority of accommodations low cost or free, is that in addition to that, they're really just there, not as special treatment, but to help us do our job. It's just a different design variation so that we can get you the PowerPoint or the spreadsheet, if you are Tiffany working in finance. And then the last one is really around embracing flexibility. And this idea that, I like to talk about my bed desk a lot. Right now I'm sitting at a desk, but also sometimes I like to work from my bed. It's more comfortable over there. I'm still getting the work done, and also the flexibility is around the time, right? And I think we have become so fixated on a 9 to 5, where maybe some people do their best work late at night or really early in the morning or at a different time of the day. So how can we give people the flexibility to know themselves best, of when they're going to do their best work and how they're going to do it? Outside of those three, I do also want to share that in the book and in presentations I've given, I talk about kind of the top 10 or 11 ways that we can build a more disability inclusive work culture. And outside of kind of the accommodations and accessibility and the assumptions, sometimes having access to an employee resource group or having role models or top leadership more vocal and visible. And then also having robust mental health policies or parental leave, family leave policies that can help support parents or people who are caring for kids or older adults. So that goes in past the three though. But I think really at the root for me is the assumptions. And I'm so grateful that I had an opportunity to, I feel like I am the exception for right now in terms of someone who worked on Wall Street who has a disability, both apparent and non-apparent. I think that's starting to change now, but I don't want to be the exception. And I'm so grateful I had an opportunity that if people made assumptions that I couldn't type and questioned whether I could be a banker or not, I may not be here having this conversation with you, right? So I'm glad I did that internship. All of that to say, I'm glad I had an opportunity to do an internship where, I was able to show people rather than have them make assumptions about what they thought I could or couldn't do.
Right. Another kind of point about this audience or, the audience of this show is that I think there's a good chunk of people that are in what we call a sandwich generation. At least this was the term that was introduced to me by a role model of mine. And she's like, I'm in a sandwich generation, which means she's caring for young kids, but she's also now caring for an older parent or a parent that might now, be disabled in some way. There's lived experience in that now. And I think this is where this conversation is also quite relevant in that, you're already mentally kind of going through these different thoughts as you're seeing your aging parent or you're seeing, someone change right before your eyes while trying to raise somebody. And that awareness now is on both sides and quite heightened. So it's another reason why I think this conversation is quite important. So Tiffany, this has been obviously a mirror and has been an education, a lot of education and awareness, and a mirror for all the ways our systems quietly may be excluding everything, but excluding disabled people, but also a blueprint about what's possible and what's actually getting better. When we center disability as a source of innovation and not necessarily relying on assumptions, which I thank you for. So before we close, I want to leave, as we always do, with an affirmation. So if you live with disability, this is for you. But obviously, if you are learning something from this episode, this is, something that we can take and bring positivity to it and bring more light to this conversation. So the affirmation is, I am not an afterthought in my own life. My worth is not measured by productivity, perfection, or proximity to someone else's normal. And I do not have to earn the right to be here. My needs are not an inconvenience, or they're not inconveniences. They are information. And that is our affirmation for the episode.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Again, I am so grateful for this conversation. I'm sure our audience will be too when this comes live. And as always, we are all about living more intentionally, and a part of being more intentional about our lives is learning and understanding and having, just having more information about everything that goes on in not just in our lives, but in the whole world. So we appreciate you so much for being here today. And everyone that's listened, thank you so much. And I will see you on the next episode of the Dope Living Podcast. Have a great evening and be safe. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.